Welcome to this episode of Sexistential Crisis. I am your host, Laura Kay, and this might be the most exciting episode we have done to date because we are going to unlock a mystery today. That mystery is why smart, successful women find it so challenging to date. And I have here with me the woman who is going to help us understand this. Jenna Birch is here with me. Jenna is a longtime journalist, dating expert, and author of The Love Gap, A Radical Plan to Win Life and Love. She's also the CEO of Plum, which is an entirely new kind of dating app. Jenna!
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here.
And back for a three-peat, we have journalist Rose Hackman back in the house.
So nice to be here.
Rose, thank you
Yay.
for being back with us today. I am really happy to have you here. Oh, and Dave is here as well.
Couldn't get rid of me if you tried. Not a journalist. Not even close. No.
But we need you here for the flavor, Dave. And
That's what I'm
so
here
much
for.
Yeah, exactly.
Just for your amusement. That's what I'm here for.
My pleasure and amusement. Yes. Yeah. All right, so let's start this off. The book is called The Love Gap, A Radical Plan to Win in Life and Love. I heard about this book back, I think it was in April or May. And as a woman who, as many people know, has been plagued by endless challenges to, I don't even know if it's hang on to a man, but just to like find a guy who I think I'm compatible with who also wants to date me in a relationship way, it has been such a challenge, and this book answered so many questions for me, Jenna. I really feel like it is the missing piece. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this book?
So it was weird because I would like to say that a bunch of worlds collided at once. In particular, I was having very similar stories coming at me at all directions from women, just like you, who were like, why in all the things that I'm doing, I'm also always successful. I can always figure it out. But dating is just this like black box.
Yeah, it's a mystery.
I don't know what to do. And so I kept hearing this from all my friends. And around the same time, there were some interesting studies that came out specifically about like the smart, independent woman that, she was the modern day dream girl. And like, I remember this study from Helen Fisher, who does work with Match.com. She kind of did this survey, which is of the U.S. population. And one of the survey questions was kind of, do you want an independent woman? Do you want a woman who's smarter than you? Would you date someone more well-educated? And, over 90%-ish of men said yes across the board, that's what they would want. And I'm like, then why are all my single friends fitting this profile? Like, what is the missing piece here? I was very confused. So I guess I
believe the answer to that is because that's what someone says they want.
Right. That's so good. And see, this is where you unpack it journalistically. I'm like, so I look into the study, I look into the study effects, and this is like a survey-based study, which is good to capture a certain amount of data, but I also figured out that what we want isn't necessarily what we choose. And that was one of the pieces that I wanted to unpack. Why do men not choose the person they claim to want? So there's a great story.
There's some research on this. Yes. Tell us about that.
Another great study she's a researcher out of the University of Buffalo. Her name is Laura Park, and she conducted a really interesting study that kind of looked at what she called psychological distance. So whenever men were talking about wanting to date a woman in theory, they always wanted, the smart one, the more successful one, the more educated one. But then they actually were kind of put to the test. They were told that they were going to meet that woman that had bested them on a test of intelligence. And the reactions were they moved their chair farther away. They rated her as, lower interest in a partner. They had less interest in following up with her number, and they had less interest in dating her. So that was kind of the fascinating thing. Once you close that psychological distance, it changes things. You don't necessarily choose the thing that you thought you wanted. And I was like, this was the beginning of the love gap. I was like, this is what we need to explore.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, there's so many dating and relationship books out there. That must be $1 billion industry.
It's a big market. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge market. And I grew up, and I don't know about you guys, but I grew up in the era of he's just not that into you. Mm-hmm. And so, right, Dave, do you know that book?
I remember that book.
Yeah.
I remember. Yeah.
Everybody knows that one.
It came out, I was looking into it today. It came out in 2004. Now, in 2004, I was actually married, but I remember is it Greg Brent, I believe is his name.
Yes.
He went on Oprah, which I used to watch at the time because I was 24 going on 60. And I was watching Oprah and I saw him on there and I'm like, yes, 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 yes. And then when I became single at 27, I was like, well, I guess he's just not that into me. I guess he's just not that into me. And I was like, why is nobody into me? Like, what is this about? And Jenna, you talk a little bit about that in the book.
Yeah, this was one of those myths that I hated. I had the pleasure of talking to tons and tons of men who, they were going to be anonymous in the book. So they really opened up to me in a lot of ways. And that was just not the case. There was so much to do with timing and like looking at her career, my career, where I'm going. Is this relationship going to jibe? They had so many other thoughts that were nobody once mentioned he's just not that into me when they discussed like their major failed relationships. It was not like I wasn't into her. It was like, here's why it failed specifically. And a lot of it had to do with them. It was their career. It was their trajectory. And I think that I watched a lot of really smart, successful, beautiful, empowered women get kind of taken down with this idea that no one was into them. That's why their relationships weren't working out.
So is that part of the message that you're trying to tell women who are very independent and successful and hot and have everything going for them, that it's not that they're not that into, that the men aren't that into the women, but it's just not good timing? You seem to suggest that women shouldn't necessarily put these men fully to the side and discard them, but actually maybe keep them on a back burner kind of situation, depending on
the type of man.
Right, depending on
fascinating. Yeah, exactly. I think it's all about, I liked, someone told me this a long time ago. It's like, does this person, are they a net positive in my life? Are they bringing something to me that like, do I feel like I get more than they're taking? I mean, if it's one of those people where you don't put them on the back burner, if you're obsessed with them and you're just like, I need to have this person now, or like we all have been in that situation where it's like,
absolutely,
like a huge connection, the love, whatever it is. Sometimes you can't put them on the back burner, and that just doesn't work, and you have to detach. But there's so many slow simmers in our generation where, I had the one timeline, some things, they just fall together. That's the guy that I call the real deal, very much ready in a great time, to have a relationship. But then there were even, I think that, we have as long as the book as somebody, who married their kindergarten sweetheart. So these are long timelines, and they kept in touch a little bit over the years, and it just needed time to fall together, and they married in their 30s.
So I also thought there was sort of like a silent kind of theme running through the book, which I don't think you ever explicitly say, but what I got out of it was like, date older men. That's how I read it, because I was like, those guys are more established. They've had a serious relationship. They're more grounded. They've been working on themselves. That's how I read it.
Yeah, I think
We've already figured out where our bullshit is.
Oh, by the way, this is episode 14 with Dave. So, yes.
I was going to make about 37 slow simmer jokes along the way.
Yeah, so I think that age is definitely correlated with that kind of maturity. But at the same time, I talked to one guy who is one of the single guys, and he was 26 or 27, and he definitely matched the maturity of, say the 36, 37, 40-year-olds.
But don't you think that's an exception?
I do. But I think it's important, to kind of
not rule
look
them
at the
all out.
behaviors.
Okay.
Look at how they're responding to you. That's the big thing that, people always gauge connection. But I'm like, that's where you have to use your logic, your analytical side. And you have to see, is this person, is it bearing out in real life? Are they making active steps to connect? That kind of thing. It's not just about a measurement of potential, which I think a lot of us get sucked into in early dating.
Well, in terms of, do they tick all these boxes?
Yep.
Are they high earners?
Yes. And am I having a lot of fun? Is there a ton of chemistry?
Right.
It seems to check the boxes, but there's that double-edged sword where you can feel so much connection with someone, and they can also not do any of the things that they say they're going to do.
Right.
Or they're very inconsistent. That was the big thing across the board, is men who are ready were very consistent.
Consistency.
Their messages were consistent. Their behaviors were consistent. Their stories add up.
Right.
That's actually what I said on maybe one or two episodes prior. I didn't say consistent. I said congruent. But I think in a similar way of, are their actions, words, behavior, are they lining up? Does this stuff make sense? And is it showing up, in a consistent manner.
Yeah, and I think that when it's not, sometimes you feel that in your gut, and that's why, I was big into intuition at the time, and I still am, that a lot of times, you're picking up on things subconsciously that aren't adding up, and you're starting to feel something's off.
Mm-hmm.
So many women told me I knew it was, going to die or something
Yeah.
bad was going to happen, like way before it did,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't listen, and so they
Yep.
like felt blindsided, and looking back though, they're like, I should have seen it. Like I did see it.
You
to
did
some
see it.
extent.
And I think we all do. I think a lot of us, especially women, tend to date on potential
Mhm.
of like, oh, but they could be so great, or I see these glimmers of how
Mhm.
they could be my perfect man.
Yep.
Right, Dave?
Well, we've talked about this.
Yeah.
That men marry women praying to God they never change, and women marry men expecting that they will.
Right.
Yeah. It's terrifying, right?
Yeah,
These are
and
so different.
then it's a nightmare. So you call these women, I just want to get back to this because we might
Mm-hmm.
use this language as we talk. The women who are successful, intelligent, career-driven, have a lot going for them, you call them the end goal,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that's what a guy is aspiring to. Is that correct?
That's often who they claim to want, and often who they intend to choose. Whether or not they do that is something.
Right.
That's another story. I mean, it all like that really hinges on, do they feel comfortable with themselves? Do they know where they're going in their lives? It's
Mhm.
not necessarily like they have, the top position, or but they have a sense of self that's really clearly defined, which I think women have really been taught to do that.
From a much earlier age.
Yes, we are taught to definitely be more emotionally in tune and ask ourselves what we want, whereas men are just, they don't give the same guidance.
There was a quote in the book that blew me away, and it was from this guy, and he said, I want her to be smart and successful, but not as smart and successful as I am.
Right.
Yes.
Wow.
It was said to me on a date.
Whoa.
It was a really good, yeah. That's
He
in
said
the
that
intro.
to you?
Yeah, he said that to me on a date. It was one of those,
Did it end there, or were you like, I'm getting out the notepad researching?
it was one of those things that I will never forget. Like, I'll never forget the context, the moment. But it was one of those, he was a very, unfiltered kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
He had a lot of charm and was pretty smooth, but I could sometimes catch him off the cuff saying something like that. And that was like early on in dating him, and I knew it was not going to go anywhere.
Honestly, though, I love the honesty in that.
Yeah.
The fact that he's actually saying it out loud. I think so many people, men, think that and wouldn't ever say it out loud, especially not to their date.
Right.
And at least you know what you're dealing with, I guess.
Right. I think that it's, but yes, and that's one of the other messages of the book is like really tune into what people are saying to you.
Yeah.
Men will tell you who they are.
Yes, listen. All right, so I want to move on to talk about the 4 types of men that women typically encounter. And for our audience, when I read these, and maybe Rose, you felt similarly, it was like, oh my God, I know every single, I can fit almost every guy I've dated into one of these 4 types.
Right.
And it was shocking. Okay, so let's just dive in. The first one is the almost boyfriend.
Yes.
Can you tell us about the almost boyfriend?
the almost boyfriend.
The awful boyfriend. Yes.
Yeah,
the
it is
awful
also
boyfriend.
awful. No. He's the guy that, everyone kind of thinks you're together, but you're really not. And he's not making super, forward romantic moves, but it's in that gray area where that there's chemistry. But usually they'll kind of approach you and there'll be some forward momentum, and then they'll back way off. And then they'll kind of, recalibrate the situation. So it'll just feel very confusing, but it's like that in between. You have an emotional connection. Maybe it hasn't become physical yet. Everybody thinks that there's something there. And you know what you feel, but you're just like, he's not making any moves in my direction. So it's like that's one of those weird ones. I got that a lot from women, where there were these guys on their peripheral, dating pool that they weren't necessarily dating them, but they would bring them up. They knew something was there.
Yeah.
With
But
these guys.
Do these guys know what they're doing? Or are they just like totally
I
unconscious
don't
to
think
this
that
behavior?
No, I do not think that they know what they're doing. This
We're
is not something they know.
masterminds.
No,
We're
no.
really not.
They're just engaging with you in a way that feels comfortable, and this is what it's coming off as.
Yeah.
So it's really kind of funny because so many women would bring it up, and it's like this nebulous thing, and it was something outside the bounds of their dating experiences, but it was definitely romantic and not
Right.
friendship.
I mean, one of the things that was interesting when I read that part of the book was you advocated for them to not necessarily be discarded as long as the interaction was positive.
Yeah.
That these actually might be men that in the future would eventually come round, and it was a question of what you refer to time and time again as timing and it needing to be the right time for them.
They're also like typically the guys that will straight up find you intimidating. They will, but over time they'll see, you're a human. You're not intimidating in the way that they thought. And I think that that's something about, letting people see you for who you are and see your flaws and see your imperfections. I think that that can really help too.
Jenna, do you feel like, this is a little bit of an aside, but do you think men and women can be friends? Or do you think that men are kind of falling into this maybe almost boyfriend territory quite a bit when they're trying to be friendly with a woman?
I think that it depends. I think you can have male friends, but I think a really close male friend, when you're both single is a pretty strange thing to have.
I agree.
So that itself, it depends on the closeness of the relationship for sure. Casual male friends for sure.
Yeah.
But close male friends, it's challenging. There's always
I think there's something going on. I just don't buy it.
But part of the fact that there's something going on is part of the fun of the friendship. Like, it doesn't need to ever become something. I have these male friends that I have some chemistry with. I love going out with them and feeling like a bit flirty, but without any kind of...
Do you feel like they're almost boyfriends?
Not most of them. There's one, obviously, where yes. But
the rest are just really casual.
Well, actually two now that I think of it.
I see.
All right, well, maybe three. All right, well,
one in each
okay.
pocket.
Actually.
But I quite like that.
Okay, yeah. I mean, like you said, it's a net positive for you. So that's why you're incented to do it. I have a really great friend. His name's Adam. I've known Adam for 10 years. We have gone on vacations together. We have worked together. We have had dinners together, taken dance classes together. And never once did Adam ever make a move in like a decade. And that's okay. Like, I'm actually completely fine with it. I haven't even talked to him in a couple of years, but I'm sure he'll like pop back up on my radar one day and I'll be like, "Hey, Laura, I'm in Detroit. Let's go grab dinner." And I'll be like, "Okay, cool." But sometimes I think maybe he falls into that category.
Oh
a
yeah,
little
there
bit.
were guys that, I mean, it was funny. I went to visit my agent right before the book came out, and the whole agency had read it, and one of the guys read it in particular, and he's like, "I'm exclusively an almost boyfriend." he's like, "I didn't even realize this was my interaction style or like my dating approach, but I'm like exclusively an almost boyfriend."
Yeah.
And I was like, they may, once it comes to the forefront, they may realize this, but it's that like soft approach. Maybe there was also a guy in the book in particular that he was just a shy guy, but he was like cute and smart, and he's just like, I just kind of let things unfold naturally, and he turned almost boyfriend situationships into relationships over time. That was his style of approach.
I actually think the book is. Rose and I were talking about this briefly today over text. I think the book is as useful to men as it is to women. I know people probably think this is a book for women, but I think men can learn a ton about themselves in reading the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I recognized, I was like, oh, I'm reading about my friend Tim, let's call him. and so I texted him, and he's in New York, and I was like, this book is really making me think of you and our conversations. And he's like, great, send me the title, I'm gonna buy it.
That's
so
awesome.
he's gonna be reading.
I can't wait for Tim to read the book. I'm very curious for if he sees himself and if it like gives him some, like reflection on, oh, this is how I'm perceived by women.
Right, absolutely.
Okay, let's go on to the second guy. This is the disappearing act. This is the man that I consistently want to murder.
That is a common
Hypothetically
feeling.
speaking, the show does not actually advocate the murder.
That was a joke. Okay, so he just disappears. What's a
disappearing act is you start strong, you have that great connection, you're super excited about it, and then he's gone off the grid. Like completely off the grid. Like he doesn't respond to texts with the questions, and no phone calls, no interaction. He goes black. And that one's a really tough one, especially, and that can happen all the way into like shutdown in the relationship. There was, couples that, he just, one, I think 2-year relationship, he just like cut off.
Oh my God.
And it was like no discussion. He was just like out. And like looking back again, she saw some of the signs leading up to the fact that this was going to happen. But like you don't want to believe that when you feel this potential. It's a lot of people, especially relationships can feel so hard to form in general today.
Totally.
That like to see someone just cut out, that was really hard. But it's also the common thing like the ghosting. That's such a traumatic thing for people now. You don't get answers. It's like an
There's
immediate
no closure.
It's immediate relationship death.
I will tell you, the one guy that did ghost me, after we had actually been dating, he had told me probably a month or two prior to that, we were talking about his previous relationships, and he had mentioned the 2 or 3 prior relationships and how he had just up and left overnight. And I remember hearing that, and I remember thinking and saying to him, "Are you going to do that to me?" And he was like, "Oh, no, that was just them."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh." So when it did finally happen and I realized what was happening, I was like, "Oh, this is what you do."
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
That happened to me too. Somebody told me that on the first date, and we kept dating, but at the same time, I'm like, this is never going to progress, because he told me he had done that the last relationship he was in. He's like, I just kind of cut out and never contacted her
Oh
again.
my God.
I'm like,
awful.
what? So that was really stressful. And I think that sometimes it's like such a shock value when people will tell you that you don't immediately know what to do with the information.
Yeah. You can't let your guard down, can you?
No, I
No.
didn't. I was never comfortable
Wow.
dating.
Hashtag reasons why we're all single.
Yeah.
Actually,
Well, are
Jenna,
you
I don't know if you're single.
Yes, I am.
Okay, the next one. This is Mr. All That But the Bag of Chips.
Yes, this was the fascinating one. This was like a category that I had to create on its own. It was like, as I was writing the book, there were like these weird men in the middle that they were like kind of doing this different thing to manage the relationship and continue forward. So it's kind of like he wants to stay in the relationship or wants to keep you around, but he's going to put boundaries on it. There's like strings. So different types, styles of that. There were people that, were like, let's do an open relationship. We'll break up, but still be best friends. Like, I mean, all the time, best friends. And he means it. Like, he still wants you emotionally around for him. So that was another weird thing. And these are the guys that like have everything, but there's a but. There's a caveat to their commitment, and it's not full all-in commitment. They still want their freedom. So this was a totally separate category where they want to keep you around, but they don't, want to give you a full commitment or a full relationship.
When I read that, I felt like I had long-term relationships with this type.
It's very possible.
And I think some women can fall into that and think, oh, he will eventually change, or oh, it will eventually get better. Like my ex-boyfriend of 5 years, when I was reading the description of Mr. All That But the Bag of Chips, I was like, oh my God,
yeah.
this is him. Like he would say things like, well, like I've hardly dated. I'd like to date more, before settling down, or, I'm so young. I still have so much to experience, all of which is actually true. But that ultimately was the reason that our relationship ended, because he didn't want it to move forward. He was like, this is it. This is where it ends. And the next woman he dated, he married, which was very interesting.
Right. So interesting to unpack. Yes.
I just wasn't the end goal for him, I guess. But anyhow, Rose, do you have any thoughts on that one?
I was just going to ask Jenna. I mean, for me, that category especially, I would want to apply the he's not that into you kind of rule defensively, and say, if you're not wanting to move forward or whatever. I've listened to so many of my girlfriends have this problem, and I have often wished they had the strength to just be able to cut it off. Am I wrong in that advice or that hope?
It's so challenging, because I think that a lot of situations are those that he's just not going to commit. And it's not your job to figure out why.
Right.
Like if you dig down deeper and figure out, he's just not that into me, but sometimes he is, and this is like his way of maintaining control of the relationship, and that's not healthy either. So it's a very weird spot where sometimes men could warm up. I think that in the book, one of the women, he was with her all the time. Like they were practically living together, and he still wouldn't, label the relationship. It was just not happening. But she was like, he was so defensive in his freedom, but he was still giving me all these things. So it's really interesting.
It's confusing.
It's confusing. He's still he's acting like a
Right.
boyfriend, but he won't give me this one thing that will make me feel better.
Mhm.
And that was his way of maintaining control of his independence. And he went from this defensiveness, not going to label it, to move to Turkey and let's get married.
Wow.
You know,
Whoa.
it was a big one. Like, and they did. They have a child now, and they're happy. So this is like one of those things where it can work out. All these situations can work out,
Sure.
but at the same
Don't
time,
cling to that though.
don't cling to it if it's driving you nuts.
Right.
Too.
Yeah.
And if it's like affecting you, that's one of those attachment things. I'm big into attachment theory, and you should not be obsessing about your relationship. If you're obsessing about it, that's really unhealthy, and you're kind of maybe you have anxiety about it.
Yeah, and briefly, the attachment styles are anxious, secure, and
Anxious,
avoidant.
secure, and avoidant. And there's one additional one that's kind of like a hybrid of fearful and avoidant.
Okay.
Or it's fearful, but it's a hybrid of avoidant and anxious. But I've seen a lot of that, especially in this dating landscape. I think that there's a lot more anxious people, and it's easier for avoidant people to be avoidant. You know, technology kind of facilitates that.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't that just very quickly the category where you also talk about John Legend, and I can't pronounce her surname, Chrissy Teigen?
Yes.
Teigen, yeah.
Yes.
Tegan?
Yes. That was so that was kind of like that was towards the end of the book, but he would have, you know,
Fitted
then
into that.
Fit into that.
Right.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I don't remember. And what changed?
The big thing was, you know, he was traveling around and he had his freedom, and, you know, she just kind of like enjoyed the relationship for what it was, and eventually like he was invested. But it was the kind of thing where she gauged, like, we have an emotional connection, we have physical chemistry, like he wants to be free. And it actually came out like one time that he actually wanted to end the relationship. He's like, I can't be in a relationship right now. And she's like, no, like, we're not ending this. And they ended up being together. But
Right.
it was just one of those things where she felt and trusted that he was going to come around, especially when he was done touring. The big thing
Yeah.
was he was touring a bunch. And so he wanted to be free during that time and just tour around. But
Well,
he was still calling her all the time and
She
texting,
must
being
have.
in touch.
She must have though felt very secure, instead of like
You
feeling
have to have
anxious.
a lot of confidence
Yeah.
to just be able to pull that off, and I think that that's different for everybody. Like, if you are good with it, like I said, if it's bringing more to your life than it's taking away, which is sometimes what people will find. Like, I really am enjoying this connection. I have a friend like that has somebody it's on the fringe. He's not ready to commit, but she enjoys the connection, and they get a lot of emotional support that way. So she's willing
So
to
she's
just,
fine
like,
with it.
She's okay. Yeah.
Well, we have to move on. Okay, so we've talked about the three losers. Let's talk about,
The
just to
worst ones.
paraphrase,
Yeah.
let's talk about what we actually are looking for. And this is the most exciting part of the book, and really what the entire book is about, is the man that you call the real deal. The holy grail, the manna from heaven, the diamond not in the rough. Or I'm just going to read, I've quoted it. I'm tattooing it to my
This guy
body.
a boxer? Like, this is a hell of an intro.
Jenna, tell us about the real deal.
This is the guy who's ready. He is ready for a relationship. And, you know, I think every woman was like, I don't think they're out there. Like, by the time that they met their real deal, these are the guys that are, you know, they're emotionally available. They're consistent. They don't do things, you know, that are off-putting or put up walls between you and commitment. And they're very much emotionally engaged. They also don't give you a bunch of reasons not to date them, which you will find out with the guys who are not ready. Will give you a bunch of reasons you probably shouldn't date them. These guys want you to, like, feel secure in the relationship, and they'll set up that kind of environment so that you will. And they're rare, I guess, more rare than I ever thought or anticipated. I kind of grew up, you know, with those old mantras from mom, you know,
Yeah.
you'll find him, you know, he's out there, you know, when it's right, it'll just work out magically. But I thought it would be so much easier if I was just, like, good at filtering, but it's not.
It
They're
is
rare.
It is hard, and I think it's why one of the things that we promote on the show so much is getting so invested in your own life and really dating yourself, doing amazing things with your life, having great friend networks and other family relationships, work networks, whatever it may be, so that you're not obsessed with finding the real deal, and you're
Right.
not obsessed or crushed by dating. You can allow it to sort of like roll off your back because
Right.
you have a rich life already.
Right.
As I've said to Rose and our other roommate, Amy, we live in a very creative household, and it's really fun.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've told them repeatedly is I've said, whatever guy I end up with, if I'm going to move in with him, it's going to have to be better than this.
Right.
I mean, it's going to have to be better because this
Right.
is so great.
Right.
What else are you going to offer me?
Right. I wrote this piece one time, and I think it was the actress, Rashida Jones. She was like, I kind of grew up on the idea that I was looking for this guy in a white horse and he was going to save me from my life. And she's like, but my life is great. So what was I thinking when I was like younger and I had this fantasy?
It's
your
all
life
Disney's
is
fault.
It is.
It really is.
Disney rom-coms, they screwed us up, didn't they?
They really did. Give us some traits. The real deals, you say they are confident, not cocky.
Mm-hmm.
They know who they are. They know where they're going, and they know what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
What else about these guys?
I think that the thing with them where they had a lot of insight into themselves. They'd, taken time for self-reflection. You kind of see traits between them. Even a lot of guys ended up being more real deal if they had sisters. They had kind of engaged with them emotionally. A lot of them had been to therapy or they'd studied psych or had like a lot of insight into themselves. They wanted to explore. When you ask them what they want, they say very specific things. It's not vague, like, smart, attractive, it's not vague. It's very specific. Like, in my last relationship, communication was an issue and, I really need somebody who's going to work on that. Like all these things were very specific. So you'll kind of sense that person,
they know exactly.
They know what they're looking for. They know what hasn't worked in the past.
And you say they've usually had a major relationship in the past. So they kind of know what it takes to make it work.
Definitely. A lot of divorced people, I mean, that's kind of like, they're really so insightful. Like I had, those were often real deal guys, like when they had, kind of healed from the process. And there was like, divorced people were my favorite people to talk to.
Well, you're in the right place.
Yeah.
Right.
All three of us at various points have been divorced. So perfect. Real deals have been grown-ups for a good long while. And I feel like that's such a great definition because you can usually tell just by that alone who is grown up and who is still maturing in those ways. I love that. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. Now, here is the real mindfuck. You say something really interesting. For a man, it's all about the right timing.
Right.
But for a woman, it's about the right guy. And I think this is why women get so confused with dating because they think, I'm not the right woman. I'm not the right woman. And it's like, it has nothing to do with that.
Right.
Can you talk more about that?
I think that there are, and they've even kind of done studies on this. Women are much more, our choice matters so much more because men kind of just get benefits emotionally and even physically from just being married. Women have to be in a healthy relationship to get those benefits and deem it that way. Like, because there's a lot of choice involved and that's kind of how we approach dating. Whereas men kind of, it's a barrier to entry, to even have those traits. And then it's all about the timing. They kind of marry when the timing is right often. And that's something where they'll kind of look back and be like, this could have been the relationship. I had lots of guys be able to look back and kind of have regrets about somebody from their past.
Really?
Yeah, because they're like, she had all the qualities that I would have wanted, but like I was young and stupid or whatever it is that they said, some version of that. And that's something that because we approach it differently often and we don't really talk to each other about the other side very in depth, I think that we get that lost. And that's where the whole he's just not that into you or I'm not good enough. I wasn't enough. Comes into play. And I hated that reason because it didn't feel right to me.
Dave, do you feel like there's like the one that got away?
Just one? No, absolutely.
It's a football stadium of ones who got away.
I mean, no, not that many, but yeah. No, absolutely, for sure. Well, and actually I pulled this up because I want to make sure I got it right because the one analogy that I love that we've actually posted on our social media every now and then just to like basically start fights is that men are like Bluetooth. They're strongly connected as long as you're close by, whereas women are like Wi-Fi. They see all of the available options, but only connect to the strongest one.
That's interesting.
That makes sense.
There's also,
Very
you referred to Sex and the City in the book, and there's a scene that I never forgot. I think it's Samantha and Miranda, and that's what Samantha says to Miranda. She says, men are like New York taxi cabs. They'll only take you for a ride if their light is on. Whereas women, you know, anyone who looks like perfect, you know, we'll take them regardless or not, whether or not we have our lights on.
Right. It's a totally different approach.
I think that's really important, though, for women to hear, because I know a lot of us have thought at certain points, what is wrong with me? It must be something about me. I must need to change myself to become more attractive. And it's like, no, you're totally fine, as long as you're not a giant asshole, which most women aren't.
Right. I promised that was one of my goals going into the book. I was like, my promise to women was I was not going to tell you to change.
Yeah.
No chance.
Thank you.
One of the sorry, you were going to go ahead.
I was
You go
just
ahead.
actually going to talk about this life-changing chart in the book, which I am showing the ladies now on my phone. It is Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs as tracked to the 4 types of men that you'll meet. So let's start at the bottom. There's physiological needs, water, food, air, rest, sex, very basic human needs. We go up a rung and we get into need 2, that's safety, you know, a roof over your head, a job, an income. And you say right above need 2, that's when we tend to see these almost boyfriends and these disappearing acts.
It's very common. It's kind of, and they're also, men kind of deal with the relationships as like comfort relationships almost in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And as long as it's comfortable, it's fine.
Comfortable, though.
But if it's not comfortable, then they're gone, or they're going to put distance in it.
So above safety, we have need 3, which is love and belonging, family ties, friendships, romantic intimacy, support, trust, on this like path to self-actualization. And then above need 3 and below need 4 is esteem, being self-confidence, independence, and garnering respect and accomplishments. In between 3 and 4, we see disappearing acts and the Mr. All That But the Bag of Chips. So they're kind of like on the road. It's kind of like watching men on this journey. Like they're moving towards self-actualization. They're accomplishing more goals, checking things off their list, but they're still not really there.
Right. And that, like, the big thing that everybody told me they wanted these relationships, and everybody it's funny because everyone kind of said the same thing. You know, this millennial Gen X, we're all, you know, looking for relationships that make us better. That's like what everyone's like, I want someone who makes me better. And it's like, well, what is, you know, there are relationships that are like comfortable, and you kind of see 2 people together and, you know, they're fighting all the time.
Right.
They don't make each other better. We see that does exist out there. But a lot of the people that were single and working through this were like, what is the separation between those kinds of relationships? And it's that esteem. I know who I am. I know where I'm going. I'm comfortable with that. You know, being able to have that higher level relationship, which is something a lot of researchers are talking about more, you know, as our, you know, life has changed, as, you know, resources have changed. Like a lot of times we seek something additional from relationships that we don't get elsewhere. So it's one of those things, especially with women, is, you know, we don't need a man for food, like water and protection and all those things. We want something more from our relationships.
And I loved that at the beginning you mentioned that was quite worrying for men and their self-esteem, in fact, that we didn't have that need for them anymore and they really needed to be needed.
Right, they do. And that's something that one of the psychologists that I talked to kind of explained that. He's like, I really do think that that's a reason we're seeing a lot of these weird behaviors as men are adjusting to this idea that they're not needed anymore. It's a whole generation of men adjusting to the idea where they've still been instilled provider.
We don't like it.
We don't. So many strong women.
Well, no, it was the one of the guests that you had on. Maybe not last time, but the time before.
Joss
was talking about how. I think she said, you know, I'm perfectly capable of killing spiders, but I still call my husband
that was
in
Joss.
to let him kill the spiders because it makes him
Slay
feel
the
needed.
dragon. Yeah.
yeah, and it's true. I just want to say the last thing on this Maslow's hierarchy of relationship needs. Between esteem and the last rung, which at the top is self-actualization, meaning realizing your potential, that's where we find the real deals. And Jenna, this is what I loved how you talked about the difference between how men and women think. Can you describe sort of that linear thinking versus the web thinking that separates us?
Yeah. So men always talked about they doing things in a certain order. Like they needed to have the job before they could get the girl. Like it was all this step-by-step thing. Whereas women were constantly telling me how they were tackling a bunch of things at once. Like, I'm dating this guy, but, work's going great, but I'm still, traveling a lot. And they would have they would be talking about a lot. And Helen Fisher is the anthropologist who does this. She talks about the difference between men and women, that men are linear thinkers or step thinkers. Like it's a step-by-step process, and they do one thing at a time. They do it well. They're like a laser beam. Women are web thinkers, and we integrate more, intuitive, analytical thinking, and we do a lot of things at once. So we can kind of navigate the hierarchy,
we can move
around
up and down and sideways, where they're just sort of
they're just like one step at a time.
Yeah.
And they've kind of, a lot of men really saw the barrier to entry in relationships and having something like that as being successful. I think part of that hinges on the idea that when they aren't where they want to be, like they don't have the esteem and they don't think that they're worthy of the kind of relationship they want. So a lot of it is dings in their own esteem that we don't think about that as women when we're dating, that sometimes it's about them.
Yeah.
The male ego is stupid. It completely is.
So deeply ingrained and so stupid.
Well, no, but I mean, like I grew up. My family's old school Italian, and that was beaten into your head over and over and over again. You've got to be a provider. You've got to do this. You've got to, and no girl's going to want you if you're a deadbeat. And then I mean, that's an entire generation. That
right.
Yeah.
And they're also not well equipped to build relationships very often. And you would know this, the emotional labor component. Women do so much of that work to build relationships, and men just kind of they
go
often
along with it.
They often don't know. Like they're just like, they don't see it because they haven't even been raised to see it.
Right.
They don't even see it. It's happening.
Yeah.
And women have to do a lot of work, of course, also to maintain those relationships. Once they're in the relationships, they're still carrying that emotional burden.
Yes.
So timelines. One of the things you mentioned is pay attention to timelines. You may know where you're at, but you have to pay close attention to where the guy is at and what he's telling you about like where he might be in his life. You mentioned things like if he says he's going to be moving soon, or he's just come to town, or, he's off to go to study at grad school, potentially not the real deal.
Yeah, I mean, I call those like periods of transition. Like when the guy's talking about a lot of transition in his life, he just had a breakup. That's always a big one. He's starting a new job. He's thinking about grad school. He's moving. He's going to be traveling a lot. Even those sorts of things where they say like they're not stable, they will like kind of tell you reasons that they're not going to be emotionally available up front. Listen to them. Yeah, listen.
The other thing I love in your book, Jenna, is it's not just about the guys. You give a lot of advice to these end goal women, which I really loved. And I loved when you talk about if end goal women are just too picky. And you make this very beautiful distinction between being picky and being discerning. Can you talk to us a little bit about overall how that feels? And we can even go through some of these specific examples.
Right. Yeah. So I would just say that the big difference is when you're being picky, it comes from a place
or you say being selective.
Yeah, selective. But that's about being discerning. Right. And I really think that comes from a place of confidence, whereas picky comes from a place of insecurity. Like, I'm going to find reasons not to like him. Like you're going to ding him for little things that probably don't matter that much. Like whether it's, a lot of things are like height, for instance. Like he has all the great qualities but height. I know people get hung up on that, but sometimes it's just
if he's not 6 feet tall, I obviously could never date him.
Yes, like all those things. That's when he doesn't call you at the specific time, but like he's still very in touch. Like they're all things that are very rigid, and they kind of come from a place of insecurity. And yeah, I make a list.
Yeah, you say some
kind of like back and forth, like the distinctions.
Some of the picky ones are looking for reasons to dismiss him, having ridiculous deal breakers, like height or hair or not hair. Those are some of my examples. Investing energy in dating only to obtain your perceived ideal. Having a closed mind, living, again, yes, as you said, by a rigid set of rules. And then the last one you mentioned is trying to change an ill-fitting ideal guy instead of walking away.
Right. There's often people that fit the boxes. They check all the boxes, but for some reason it's not clicking, it's not connecting, the relationship isn't working. And I think this is always, one of my favorite interviewees was a guy, and he had kind of done everything. I won't say he'd done everything to find love, but he'd done so many things to find love, like perhaps go on reality shows even to find love. So he tried everything possible. And he's like, I realized at the end of the day, like if you have these external reasons to move the relationship forward, and a lot of times that is our list. the list of things that we said we want, but it's not clicking. Like if you feel external pressure to stay in the relationship, that's not a good thing. He's like, it should all be this internal. I feel connection. I feel like I want to invest in this. It feels right.
Mm-hmm.
And that distinction was important to me too, even as, a dater thinking. I think about that a lot now.
It's amazing that the criteria for being selective, one of the things I really love here is you say having high standards of treatment. So being picky doesn't mean accepting to be treated less than you feel you deserve. It's a certain standard of treatment you want men to hold up, which frankly is not unreasonable when you meet the guys who actually do it. Other selective traits, looking for reasons to like him.
Right.
Yeah.
I do not do, see, this was an eye-opener because I go on dates and I'm like, I put my human behavior hat on.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, what the fuck's wrong with you? Go. Tell me
What's
about your mother.
skeleton,
Go.
right?
I actually told a guy last week, this was my opening message to him. He wrote me a big, huge
One of those
tome. And my response was, I notice that you are not facing forward in any of your online profile dating pictures. What are you hiding from?
Wow. That was a direct one.
We did go on a date.
Okay.
But
Aren't you going on another one?
we are going on
That's
another
amazing.
one. But takes a special man to put it. I can be a piece of work. So yeah, but that's being very picky, and that's looking for
Yeah.
problems, which is, give them a little break.
Yeah. If there are those problems that don't really, affect the nature of the relationship, they're not going to affect how they treat you. That's just, kind of look for reasons to like them. Look for the positives, not the negatives so much, especially in the beginning. Like everyone's going to have hair on it or not be 100% what you thought you wanted or what you put on your checklist. Just, let it unfold.
Mm-hmm.
People can surprise you.
Conversely, I also went on a date last week where the guy, I think he had a deal breaker on how I eat sushi.
Oh, really?
How
Yes.
do you eat sushi?
And well,
Did you pass it? The test?
no, I failed.
Oh.
I realized because I was using chopsticks, and he looked at me and he said, "What are you doing?"
Huh.
And I said, "I'm eating my sushi." And he's like, "I
Fairly
can't believe."
standard.
Oh no, I'm sorry. It wasn't chopsticks. It was that I put my wasabi in my soy sauce. That's what it was.
Oh,
And-
we've got someone who doesn't
Doesn't
agree
Okay,
with this
well,
over.
okay.
we haven't been out since then, and I think that might be why.
I do that.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
well,
have friends
Dave,
that do that.
Dave, we can establish 1,000
that-
reasons for why we're a good match.
No,
but,
I'm like, who doesn't do that?
well, I guess I don't do that in Japan. I don't know.
That's interesting.
They also eat nigiri with their fingers.
That
That's
sounds
the
a little
right thing to
picky
do.
of him.
Yeah,
That
it was
is
very
picky. Yeah,
picky.
that's super picky.
It was really picky. It was bizarre. And he's probably listening, so.
Oh
there
my
you go.
gosh.
Hey
Fun.
there.
Yeah, this is Jenna. This
This
is
is a
actually
fun
how I
part.
build listenership for the show. I tell all the guys I'm dating
That's
to
amazing.
listen to the show.
Well, this is
and-
it's always fun when you do something dating related or relationship related. It's always fun to then date, and then you always inevitably tell them what you do or like
Mhm.
what you
Right.
and then they're
It's
super
always fun.
curious. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we just have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure that we give women some actionable advice. And you have, there is so much advice in this book, we cannot cover all of it. But I want to talk about the 3 C's of connection, compatibility, and character. Can you describe those and why those are important for women to look for?
Yeah. The connection is the foundation. Like, I really feel like the strongest relationships were all based around the strongest connections they felt. Like, they felt strongly for this person. So that's like one of those things. It's that
Like feeling
it's
a spark.
that chemistry. It's that, ease with someone. I think it's not the friction, it's the ease, but you have that chemistry and you have that flow. And that's really the basis, is that like it's something to build from. And then we have compatibility.
Yep.
That's, their lifestyles match up with you. That's kind of the external variables that, you can see your lives aligning. You have that compatibility. You want the same things. You're heading in the same direction. That's a really important thing to look for. And then character, people, that's something that can be hard to find, or it can feel hard to find, especially because this is a very ghosty, flaky generation, that kind of thing. But somebody who is wired, for commitment, they're honest, they're trustworthy, they do the things they say. That's a big one, that consistency that's there.
Mhm.
Those elements of character are really important, and that's going to sustain a relationship long term. You're going to respect that person. You want to be with someone you respect. So character is important.
So when we meet one of these unicorns out in the wild,
Don't freak out.
Right. That's what I was going to say. What is your advice for women when they think they have met the real deal?
What's crazy is that a lot of times women will meet someone like this and they'll freak out and self-sabotage.
Right.
They'll be like, this can't be real. I'm gonna break it down. And I will see people get very picky when they meet these guys. Very, very picky. And I think that that's where you break into the insecurity. It's like the unknown. Like you haven't met somebody that's meeting you halfway who's really ready to build something. But my biggest thing is like when you work on yourself and you really feel secure in yourself and what you bring to the table, then you're going to date in such a better mindset. So I think like be willing to put yourself out there, be vulnerable and fall in love. And I think that that's one of the hardest things to do is to put yourself in that position where you keep pushing yourself a little bit more. You're not overthinking things. Like I still have extensive conversations with friends about when to send the text message.
Yeah. Oh, believe me, in a house of
We're
three
grown-ass
women,
women.
can you imagine what's happening?
We need to be able to do this. So with a real deal, that's not going to matter if you sent the text, 4 minutes later or 4 hours later.
Right.
If you get to it at the right time, send it. Be authentic with who you
Just
are.
trust yourself.
Trust yourself in the connection.
And you do say in the book, don't be afraid to break it off, and that usually we can figure that out, and I totally agree, within the first couple months.
Mm-hmm.
And that has always been fairly clear to me. If I'm not seeing a steady progression
Mm-hmm.
in the first couple months, I'm like, it's not coming.
Yeah, and that's something that I was told a long time ago when I did the dating coaches. I take like various things and just file it away. But this dating coach said, and it's especially true because for the first 2 years you have a lot of chemistry. It's like you're not gonna know in the honeymoon phase in the first 2 years. He said it'll take 2 years to know if a guy is your husband. It only should take 2 months to know if he's your boyfriend. Like one or the other. Like don't waste time. If you know what your goals are. And that's what you're doing. You're dating for a relationship. You want to find a real deal. Then you can figure that out within 2 months for sure.
Now,
Definitely.
I want you to tell us about Plum. This is so unbelievably exciting because most of us have experienced dating apps and hate them or have various types of problems with non-response, ghosting. Bumble was supposed to be the solution for women because then women had the choice. However, what I've found in Bumble is that men just never are on it or
Right.
never respond.
Yeah.
And so you have come up with something called Plum, and I'll just read briefly and then I'd love for you to tell us more. Plum creates a new kind of online dating experience, tackling key app-related complaints at their source. So it is designed with the female experience in mind and is also rewarding to men who are genuinely good catches. How is it different from all the other apps?
Right. So the basis of it, and one of the big things that I found with app dating, and a lot of people would tell me it's chaotic. I don't know why anything sticks. It's like very hard to do. I'm investing so much energy and I'm not getting anything back. And a lot of that, context is so important when you're meeting someone. And I was talking to so many psychologists about these same concepts in some of the work I was doing. And so this kind of replaces even like a social network or like, where you'll meet people, and we have an accountability barrier where women will get to rate men on 3 very important early dating components, of respect and authenticity. Like they are who they say they are. They're respecting, they're not flaking. And it's like an Uber rating. So it's very quick. There's no mean comments. We're not doing that, but it's something where it will capture.
And it's not based on their
that-
appearance.
No, not at all. They're not appearance based at all. They're all character based, respect based.
Awesome.
But it'll be great and you'll be able to do that. And women will still have the choice to initiate or receive. We have a little toggle in there. So I heard that from a lot of women too. And that was one of their big complaints about Bumble was that, men are lazy. Like they just field all these messages and, I'm kind of waiting to see who will come back to me. And it's not really fixing a problem. So, you can kind of choose the experience that you want to have as a woman. And there's a toggle, whether you want to be the initiator or the receiver.
And what's the benefit for men to use the app?
So as they get higher ratings, and as long as their ratings remain high, we'll get them in front of the more engaged women, the more engaged matches. So they'll have a better chance to meet that right person.
I love it. And when is this app? When is Plum coming out?
Oh, December 1st. But you can go to plumdating.com and type in your email address, and we'll send you a little quick email notification when we're on the App Store.
Oh my God. I cannot wait. We are going to do, Jenna, we're going to have you back.
Yeah.
When I do Plum in Detroit,
That'll be
we're going to have to do a
exciting.
launch party here.
Yeah,
to
that would
get
be so much fun.
all the guys on it.
Love it.
Oh, yes.
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 Yes. And we will absolutely have you back to talk about it because I think
So
that's
much
pretty
fun.
cool.
App dating.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
This was Jenna Birch. Her book is The Love Gap. It is unbelievable. It is amazing. We covered 20% maybe of what's in the book. There is so much more there to understand and experience, and really actionable tips for women on both your behavior and how to understand men's behavior. I love this book. I think it is truly, we had an episode a few episodes ago where we talked about Steve Harvey's dating book, which is called
Think like a man, act like a woman.
Act Like a Woman,
Yeah.
Think Like a
Oh,
Man.
no, think like a think like a man, act like a woman, because you're supposed to
Is
still
that what
pretend
it
you're
is?
a feminine woman, but
Gosh.
really
And
deep down you're.
It is so, whilst I agree with some of his advice, it's so regressive.
Yeah.
And like we've just like stepped back into the 1950s where you have to like give up your quote unquote cookie to the man regularly so he
Yeah,
doesn't
that
cheat on
was-
you. I'm like,
yeah.
what the hell are you
I
talking
remember
about?
the cookie. That was.
Yeah. Guys, if you like this episode, please head over to iTunes or your favorite podcast listening app and give this show 5 stars. And until next time, thank you so much for being here, Jenna and Rose and Dave.
Wonderful being here.
Thank you. This was so much fun.